Evening, everyone. Thanks for being here. You are hearty souls on a actual winter night. I want to thank our hosts at Dominican University. We've hosted a lot of events here over the years. They are gracious and professional. Melanie Thompson in the back of the room is making everything go round, and we appreciate that. I want to thank Charlie Meyerson, who is our moderator. Charlie is from many places, but right now Chicago Public Square. If you're not signed up, you should be. I want to thank Jessica McKinnon, who is our election season coordinator for our events, for our digital and print election coverage. I want to thank the Good Heart Work Smart Foundation, which again this year is underwriting our election coverage, which is a big help to us as we try to be ambitious in the work we're doing. Most importantly, I want to say something that we've said for 42 years, and that is thanks to our neighbors who put themselves forward as candidates. Hard duty in Oak Park and River Forest. So it is appreciated and valued. I've done this for a long time, and in the course of all those years, there have been a handful of people who come to us as candidates who we had some suspicion of in terms of motives and axes to grind, but it is a tiny percentage. Most everyone is doing this because they have a vision and a belief in our communities. Wednesday Journal is now part of a nonprofit entity called Growing Community Media, have been for the last 3 years. We publish 5 flags from the west side through Oak Park, River Forest, Forest Park, Riverside, Brookfield, and into Proviso Township. We believe that community journalism is absolutely at the core of democracy in the villages that we serve, and that we are essential to that discussion and to the debate. We need you to be participants in our nonprofit as we work to build a sustainable model for community journalism for decades to come. So if you are not a donor, not a member, think about it. And you can go to oakpark.com where you will see repeatedly donation buttons. So please think it over. Charlie Meyerson, thank you for being here, Charlie. Yep.
Thank you, Dan. Before we get into it, just a bit about me and where I'm coming from in this role. If I had to pick one reason why my wife and I moved here I moved in 82 and she moved in 83, it would be that we wanted the kids that we didn't have yet to grow up in a community committed to education and educational diversity. We sent 3 sons through Oak Park schools, and acknowledging that the community's work is far from finished, I nevertheless think District 200 sent them off well prepared for the world. But they are long gone from the system now, and so this session will be as enlightening for me as I hope it will be for many of you in the audience. I haven't been paying that much attention. So welcome candidates: Tim Brandhorst, Graham Brisbane, Jonathan Livingston, and Brian Souders. I got those right, didn't I? Acknowledging that some of these topics are more complex than others, we're going to ask you to aim for short answers, ideally a minute. That'll give us time to follow up and, on occasion, debate. So I'm going to start with an easy one. Why are you running? Tim.
Thank you, Charlie. And before I start, thank you to Dan Haley and Growing Community Media for sponsoring this. It's a true community service. Thank you, Charlie, for agreeing to moderate. And thanks for everybody for coming out. I am running really for a simple reason, and that's gratitude. D200 and this community have been really good to my family and particularly to my kids. And I'm really grateful for everything the high school has provided for my kids. The only way that I have to repay that debt of gratitude is through service. And I've tried to serve the high school over the past years, and I look forward to serving it in the future. I'll stop there.
Hi, good evening. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you. I'm Graham Brisbane, and the reason I'm running is, first of all, I think public service on a board is a great way to give back to a community, which in my case has given so much to me and my family. Secondly, I'm passionate about public education, and I've been involved in it in one form or another for the past 15 years as my children have come up through the D97 and D200 schools. And thirdly, I have experience serving on a school board. I was on the District 97 board from 2013 to 2017. And I think that past experience will allow me to be effective as a board member at D200.
Jonathan Livingston.
Hi, Jonathan Livingston. Thanks so much for coming out tonight. Like so many Oak Park residents, I moved here. My wife and I moved here with our son because of the schools. And me deciding to run for the OPRF board was a really simple one. It's even though my son is a 6-year-old, he just entered kindergarten in the Spanish immersion program at Lincoln, and it's wonderful. It's always been an aptness of fit when I look for the best opportunities for service. And this is a great opportunity to serve. I've said this before, I don't have an axe to grind or a cross to bear. I think that's a competitive advantage coming into it. It's really just an alignment of skills and background. I've a very strong experience in research, evaluation, strategy, working with nonprofits, working on governing boards, and I'm very passionate about equity and looking at how we can better build our skills-based vocational training. I don't think equity and excellence are a zero-sum game. Thank you.
Ryan Souders.
Hey, I had my own microphone. I think I've been following the high school. I have 2 kids in high school. I know that OPRF is in the schools are really one of the cornerstones of our community, following it for a long time. And I know some people know me as been kind of a commentator a lot of times on what happened. And I'll be honest with you, I had friends who challenged me to get off the sidelines and actually serve. And I've served in the community and some other things, but I think this was a time that I wanted to really get my hands dirty and do what I can to help improve education and just improve generally some of the things that, you know, in the village that is really unique, in some cases really challenging, that we really love, and that has a lot of great things and a lot of room for improvement. So, you know, I'm really anxious to be able to serve, and as part of my job, I do a lot of listening, figuring out what it is that other people are dealing with, what we and where we need to go, and trying to make that connection. I think that that's a really important asset, I think, for a board that frankly is the largest taxing body in all of Oak Park. And it's really important what happens there.
All right, I'm gonna try to mix up the order and start with a different candidate each time. So we're gonna start with Graham on this one. Reflecting on your own high school years, tell us one thing you loved and one thing that you didn't love. And we'll go this way and come back.
Okay, so the question, to be clear, is about ancient history, which is when I was in high school.
Yes.
All right. So class of 1986, West High School in Iowa City, Iowa. I will tell you that probably the things I love the most is the variety of curricular activities I could be involved with. And one of the leading activities for me was being on the school newspaper. I loved being on the paper, loved writing stories, loved staying up late as we were editing it and getting it ready for print. What I didn't enjoy, as my mother will tell you, is getting up early in the morning and frequently missing the school bus. I'm just not a morning person, so that was the toughest part for me, is an 0800 start.
School board meetings are in the evening, right?
That's correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's good. Jonathan. Microphone's not on?
Turn it off. Is it on? Okay.
There we go.
Sorry. So I would definitely start with the it's just sort of going to high school rolled the boulder away from the cave for so many, you know, transformative, formative social opportunities. I mean, I just walking through the halls of the school on the tour with Superintendent Johnson the other day was just so nostalgic to see that all these things, you know, looking at the walls and the posters for drama and sports and all these other, you know, film club. I mean, there were so many things that were just wonderful. And I look back on that it's nice to see those traditions continue. The thing that I think would be stand out as a negative, I look at our the sort of drug alcohol awareness and prevention that we got back then, and I felt like it was abysmal, and it didn't really do much to influence anybody that was in the room taking those courses. And I think that was a real systems failure. It's affected a lot of people I love, you know, the disease of addiction, and it's I think we need to do a better job in the high schools in addressing teaching our kids about that stuff.
Ryan?
For me, this one is easy. For me, it was the extracurricular type of activities that were available to me. I went to a fantastic high school in the northwest suburbs, Prospect High School, and I was a music kid. I played trombone, competitive marching band, nationally competitive marching band, but I ended up doing marching band, jazz band, 3 jazz bands, you know, roped into playing in the orchestra when they had pieces that did that. But then also I acted in plays, I acted in comedy troupes, and I also played in baseball for 4 years. People roped me into everything, which is where I made my friends, which is where I found my tribe, and just the breadth of opportunities that were available to me were like really critical. And those are things actually that lasted me honestly through my college career, where I also played trombone in the marching band, in the jazz band. And then also I was the student coach for the MSU baseball team in Michigan State. So like these things helped me through my college years. And the weirdest thing is actually I still play trombone over at the university down the street in the Concordia University Wind Ensemble. My kids thought that was hilarious that I had to get a tux and play in front of a bunch of people. That was funny. And honestly, the one thing I didn't like about high school was math homework. There's a box in my basement. I hope my kids don't find that's a piece of paper that's all the little notes from the math teacher saying that Brian doesn't turn his homework in if he only applied himself.
Tim?
I was a theater kid, and so all of my happiest memories from high school are on stage performing. I was a singer, so I have lots of happy memories of performing. And so these last few years, as I've had kids at OPRF involved in the theater department and our amazing performing arts department, it's just been such a source of joy for me to kind of relive my own high school experience and watch our amazing performers at OPRF. I would say the less good experience. My family moved a lot when I was a kid, and I think that it taught me the importance of a welcoming environment, particularly a welcoming school environment. How important it is to make every child feel connected to the school community. And I had experiences that were great and experiences that were not so great growing up with various schools in that regard.
At the heart of so much of the debate over this election is the initiative dubbed kind of ominously, and I might add unimaginatively, Project 2. If you were explaining to someone new to town or maybe new to planet Earth what Project 2 is, how would you describe it? And I'm going to ask you to do so objectively at this point. We'll get to your opinions after this, and we'll start with you, Jonathan. What is Project 2?
Project 2 is an effort to address some longstanding needs in the at the high school, and it's a project that has been led by a diverse group of community citizens and leaders to really get at the heart of the issue and to look at how this pressing issue can best be addressed in both a fiscally responsible manner, but also in from a position of strength and bold visionary standpoint as well.
Ryan?
I think it's the athletic, phys ed, and pool portion of an effort to bring our facilities that are 100 years old back, that have been neglected for almost 20 years, especially maybe even longer, irresponsibly neglected for so long. And it's basically the PE and the pool aspect of this effort and this journey to try to bring our facilities up to standard.
Tim, you're next.
Project 2 is one of a series of projects that all link back to the Imagine plan that was adopted by the board in 2018. The Imagine process was a community-led effort by 40 community members and faculty to assess the facilities needs of the entire building, to prioritize those needs, and to come up with a plan for addressing all those needs. We're about to complete work on Project 1, and Project 2 will be the next of a five-phase series of facilities improvements. Jonathan and Brian are right. Primarily, Project 2 is going to address the needs of what currently is the South Building. Those are the PE learning spaces. These are 100-year-old spaces and 80-year-old spaces that simply no longer function for 21st century learning. They're a safety hazard. They're not accessible. It will be the plan is to replace all of these existing spaces with modern PE spaces that are going to be highly functioning and will support 21st century learning.
Graham.
Okay, welcome to Oak Park and River Forest. Our high school is OPRF. That building and its campus were first developed 106 years ago. And over time, the building and facilities were expanded through additions through time to get to the building you have today. In 2018, a committee of citizens got together to develop a long-term capital facilities infrastructure plan for this 106-year-old building and campus. From that plan, they developed several phases, and then they assigned a sequence to each phase based on conditions and needs. Phase 2 refers to the southeast section of the building that was built and essentially not changed since 1928. And it includes athletic facilities, dance facilities, locker rooms, and a few other associated spaces that are next due up for rehabilitation, modernization, and improvement in order to meet the 21st century needs of our students.
Brian, you're up next. Now that we've established what Project 2 is, what is your position as a candidate on this project?
I have a couple things. I mean, first of all, I think my number one thing is that in financing a project that is this huge, it absolutely 100% needs to go to a referendum of the people in town. And number two is that I'm concerned that all of the discussion about Project 2 is talking about Project 2 in a silo, as if this is the only thing that's going on in the building and the only thing that will go on. And when you're spending this much amount of money, it's going to have a huge impact on what can happen in the future, right? And there's been no discussion, almost zero discussion, both with the finance committee and at the board table about our capacity to ever do phases 3, 4, and 5 in our lifetimes after we spend this amount of money. In the board meeting last week, Fred Arkin said Project 5, if we ever do it. And right now, part of the board is going to spend $1.7 million in the West Pool to create a temporary facility because there's going to be such a long gap between the finish of Project 2 and the start of Project 3. And this has not been a discussion. We just keep saying we're going to get a pool and a gym building, but we don't talk about what the trade-offs are going to be in order to do that. And that's a huge concern that I have, because those other facilities are not just athletic. They are classrooms, they are labs, special ed, accessibility, music department. And those things are not being discussed, or our capacity to ever do those in the future. It's just, let's just do this one thing and don't talk about what the context is. And we need to talk about what the context is so that everybody knows like what we're getting and what we are not going to be able to get, and for how long with those other needs in the building.
Tim.
I've been a proponent of Project 2 for much of the last year. I've written.
Sorry, you said opponent? Proponent, I'm sorry.
I am very much in favor of Project 2. And I have to say, I'm really gratified to see community sentiment, the widespread embrace of Project 2 over this past year. I give OPRF a lot of credit. They opened up the school to tours over the last year, and hundreds of people have seen the South Building. They've seen with their own eyes how unacceptable the conditions are. And I think most people that tour the spaces come out of it feeling the same way that I did when I saw it last May. It's appalling. It's absolutely unacceptable that we send our kids into these spaces every day and we make our faculty work in these spaces every day. We have known as a community for a really long time that that the Southeast Building is unacceptable, that these are learning spaces that are not functioning for our kids. Our faculty has been telling us that for a long time, and we have kicked the can down the road for years, if not decades, and not solved these problems. And so I'm really gratified that not only is the community embracing Project 2, and there's increasingly widespread community support for this project, but I'm really gratified that the board has worked assiduously over this past school year toward making a decision on Project 2, and I believe are going to go forward within the next 2 months. None of the 4 candidates are going to have a vote on this issue. The current board is going to decide this issue, and I believe they're going to move forward with Project 2. And I think that's great. I think they're doing a great service to our community.
Graham?
Okay, so first of all, I'm going to guess that there might be questions later about how to fund Project 2 and other capital needs for the school. So I'll leave that issue of the funding for later, because I'm guessing it'll probably come up. So first of all, as I mentioned before, the campus is 106 years old. And you started with an initial building, and then you saw expansions and additions grow around it. One of the very interesting things, if you get into the high school, is that as you walk through the building, it's almost like you're walking through time. And right now, the center of the building, because of phase 1's modernization, when you're there, you're in the year 2023. Then you walk to the south, and you'll walk through a big section of the building where you are essentially in 1967. That would be the year in which the music hall areas and associated classrooms there were last upgraded and improved. Then you go into the southeast corner, which was built in 1928, and for all intents and purposes has not been modernized or expanded since that time. When you walk into the dance studio has 2 large pillars in the center, which is going to be really tough to be dancing around. And if there wasn't a stereo in the corner of that room, you would think you are in roughly 1930, 1936. The changes literally haven't taken place over 100 years. The other thing I'll say about that section of the building is that not only is it pretty surprising that a school of OPRF's renown hasn't improved the southern end of its building in almost 100 years. The current conditions, I think, are completely contrary to Oak Park and River Forest values of equity. For example, it is completely ADA non-compliant. It exists in its current state only because of the grandfathering rules of ADA. Why are there 2 separate small pools? That's because they're from an era in which the two different genders were not allowed or should not be allowed to be swimming together. So in general, I think that section of the building is way overdue. Now, the other thing I'll say, until Charlie, you stop me, is
I'm close.
Okay, this district had a bit of a misfire around 2015. They were in kind of an attempt to go just initially make a change to a pool, and it also happened to include a parking garage. The citizens said, hey, we don't like that. They forced a referenda. The referenda lost. And a lot of people who I know and trust on education issues, they support the rehabilitation of the Southeast End, but they didn't like that process. So I think it's to the credit of the district that they called a timeout after losing that referenda and said, all right, let's do this right. Let's gather a group of very informed and capable and smart citizens. Let's use a citizen committee to not just look at the pool and the athletic area. Let's look at the entire building. Let's develop a comprehensive plan. And given the thousands of hours, person hours invested in that, all the benchmarking of that and so forth that was undertaken, I think it's a mistake to try to second guess all that work. I think we need to move forward in Project 2. The issue of financing is the next question.
Jonathan? Mike's not on. No, one more time.
For anyone listening here that hasn't had a tour of the athletic facilities, the pool, and the locker rooms recently, I would certainly urge you to do so. I had not seen the state of these facilities until we had a candidate tour a few weeks ago, and suffice to say, I was very disarmed at what I saw. It was astounding at what, from my vantage point, it's a tremendous risk management liability minefield for one, but it's also dreadfully in need of improvements. And I would also go so far to say that it almost has a psychological effect on you when you go into these facilities. They're so old and so depressing. Project 2, my perspective on the structure and process applied to Project 2 is that it's been nothing short of empathic, thoughtful, and certainly charged with integrity. I think that the current board that will be making this decision is a board of integrity and is a board of empathy. And I think that there has been a very transparent, straightforward process that has been presented to the community involving a very diverse panel of community members and faculty to do this right and to really operate from a position of strength and to make the right, bold decision going forward.
All right, this is going to be a really short answer. And we'll start with you, Tim. Should voters have the right to vote yes or no on Project 2? Or should the board make the call on its own? Start with you.
Well, the board is going to make the call on its own. The board is going to make a decision in the next couple of months as to the
Okay.
best funding strategy.
If you were on the board, you'd be okay with that?
I will tell you what factors I would advise the board to look most closely at. I think it was really interesting to see the
I'm gonna cut you off. I mean, if you were on the board, again, should the board make the decision on its own, or should it turn this back to the voters?
It's not a yes or no question. There are a number of factors that play into that. I think it was interesting to see the funding strategies that were presented to the Community Finance Committee in January, because there were multiple funding strategies that pull from multiple funding sources. There were strategies that include going to referendum, that have a property tax consequence. There were funding strategies that don't involve going to referendum, that have less of a property tax consequence. And to me, that was a really interesting revelation, was that there are all these different funding strategies available to us, and they really do have a wide range of consequence in terms of our property taxes. And so if I were advising the board, if I were at the board table, this is something that I would want to have discussed. I think that the driving factor is, what are the consequences to our property taxes for each of these different funding strategies? Is there a funding strategy that has no impact on property taxes or has a minimal impact on my property taxes? I would really want to know that. And if there is one, I think that's the most important factor. If there's an option that doesn't require a property tax increase and it does require a referendum, then let's go to referendum. If there's a funding strategy that doesn't require a property tax increase and doesn't require going to referendum, then let's not go to referendum. Let's choose the funding strategy that keeps our property taxes the lowest. So I think it's a little more complex question than just a yes or no on, how do you feel about a referendum? I think there's a huge property tax consequence. I think the other factor that I would really want the board to consider is the fund balance. The fund balance is the issue that has vexed our community for more than a decade. It skews every conversation about capital improvements at the high school. And I realize the two are not directly connected, but if we can come out of this process with a right-sized fund balance and keep that fund balance at an appropriate level from this point forward, I think that's a really healthy thing for our community. And so if I would be okay with taking money from the reserves and putting it toward Project 2 and coming out of this with a win-win.
All right, Graham. Yes or no vote for the voters, or does it go to the board?
As a general philosophy, the best and right way to fund long-term capital infrastructure for schools is the use of long-term capital bonds, which are subjected to community referendums.
Jonathan?
So I agree. This is not a very simple yes, no question. I would echo Graham's sentiment that referendums are a powerful tool in our democracy. Their referendums are, generally speaking, I fully endorse the use of referendums. I think this is a more complex issue at hand here, that we have an Imagine Foundation that has been established to raise money on behalf of Project 2, and that they've done a great job. We've yet to see how they're going to step forward and apply the money to this project. There are a lot of factors at play right now. So I would say that yes, I am pro referendum in this case. I do trust the board to make the right move, and I look forward to seeing what that is.
Ryan?
100% this needs to go to referendum. In the last election cycle, there are 4 current board members who said that this needs to go to referendum as well. Mr. Kofsky said this in a finance committee meeting. In another forum, Fred Arkin said that the biggest mistake that he ever made in his first time as a trustee was that he voted for the bypass project in 2014. Sarah Spivey, who's on the current board, said that was also her biggest mistake ever. And Marianne Monarash has also been said in her forums that if you're doing big long-term capital projects, it needs to go to referendum. One thing I'll say is the reason that we're here 12 years later because of the pool thing is because there's been a distrust between what the school has done and in dealing with the community, right? And one of those first things was trying to get us like 1,000-seat pool and do it without a referendum that we had a backdoor referendum on. And I think that some of those feelings are still here. And I don't think that it's in the best interest of the school, its political capital, and its reputation to once again bypass voters where, 90-some% of schools in Illinois use referendum voting to do this, right? And if you're going to rip your reputation to shreds because you really want this and because you think you're going to save a few $1 million, you really have to worry what happens down the road when you're paying for debt certificates and you have a financial issue and all of a sudden you're going to need to go back to the voters for an operating referendum. And a few previous years later, you said that you don't deserve to have a vote on this, but we really need you to vote yes on this now. I don't want to be in the position to go to voters in that situation. Or there's another chance that the school has an issue in the community and they basically said, you don't deserve it. If voters deserve to vote to put people like us on the board, they deserve to make a massive generational capital investment, which this is. This is not just a pool and it's not just a gym. This is going to affect whether or not we're ever going to update music facilities, gymnastics, the track and field, which is the most used thing in the building. The field house is Project 5. So you're not just voting on this. We need to understand the context so that voters can decide that, yes, this is what we want right now in the context of what we can do in the future.
Thank you. I'm going to remind you all, as much as I'd love to spend hours and hours here, we need to cover a lot of ground. So I'm going to ask you to stick to those shorter answers if you can. A reminder to the audience here at Dominican tonight, you have index cards on which you can write questions you'd like asked of the candidates. When you're done writing those down, you can hold the index card out and Jessica McKinnon will pick them up from you and then bring them up here. So it's been 5 years since filmmaker Steve James' acclaimed documentary series America to Me turned a spotlight on the disparities between Oak Park and River Forest High School's commitment to equity and diversity and the realities, which failed to match the hype. Recent test scores and grades have revealed a vast achievement gap among Asian, white, Black, and Hispanic students. Have we made progress? And if we haven't made enough, probably the case, what would you do as a board member to accelerate our progress in terms of making Oak Park and River Forest High School more equitable to all kids? Graham, let's start with you.
So I, like a lot of us, very much enjoyed that documentary. I thought it was very interesting and insightful. You know, that was early mid 2010s. And I'll tell you that, you know, board service is a lot like steering a battleship, and you're watching planets move. So change is happening, but sometimes it's hard to see as it's occurring. So I think at the time, the leadership and culture really wasn't right to address seriously the opportunity gap. And what you saw was a replacement of leadership. I think Dr. Pruitt-Adams did a lot of great work, and the board did as well, to reorient and kind of reprioritize towards addressing the opportunity gap, which to me remains the defining issue in public education today. Now, the reality of where we are now is that those disparities in racial and economic outcomes are still quite stark. And we've had this very serious setback as a result of the pandemic. But you have to look now at what the administration is doing. And I'm supportive of its current strategies and tactics, because no forward-thinking district can simply sit on their hands and not address this as priority one. So those tactics they've undertaken, the lead of which being the Honors for All effort with the freshman curriculum, I fully support that, but we're in the early innings of it, so there's a lot of data and monitoring that needs to occur. I'm also very supportive of efforts in order to hire a more diverse teaching staff so that that staff better reflects our students. The board has more work to do in that area. The other thing I would also then say is just to connect it to fiscal stability. There's another issue around ensuring that the long-term finances and fiscal governance of the district is very solid, because you need that solid foundation in order to support equity work.
Jonathan.
So we will be seeing very soon the returns on what's working, what isn't working with the detracking, with the changes made to the freshman curriculum. I think by the end of the year, we'll start to see some of the data that's tells us what's working and what isn't. I think that we have a tremendous amount of work to do in the area of equity, and I think that one of the areas that I'm most passionate about is an equity issue. I think that we need to do a much better job providing opportunity to all students. And I think that means looking at how we retool, revamp our reapproach skills-based learning, vocational training, certificate opportunities. I think that over the last several decades, we've seen a lot of these programs that were in the high school, them fade or just discontinue. A lot of these skills-based programming. You could sort of draw that parallel with our newfound obsession, over the last several decades, of chasing the 4-year degree as being the universal golden carrot for all high school students. And I think we know that that is not the case. It works for some very well, but for others, it doesn't work so well. And I think that it really is incumbent on us as a huge equity issue to make sure that every single student is there, that there's opportunity for them to explore their best vocational opportunity, and we need to do better their equity. One last thing about equity, I think that huge equity issues are also about making sure that when kids are at the school, they have all of their needs addressed. I think that we need to make sure that our kids are taken care of from a food security standpoint. I know we do that, and we do a good job there. But I think as far as looking at all areas, mental health, physical well-being, drug and alcohol prevention and awareness, these are also equity issues. These are issues that need to be there for all children. They need to be the very best they can possibly be. I'll leave it there. I'm going to go over.
This is a systemic problem, and it takes time to change systems, and not just change systems, but to change how we operate in these systems. I think that there's a groundwork and there's a good framework that's in place right now, but it's not going to be enough until we start to see real progress, right? I believe that the staff is working on equity issues like all the time. We're changing cultures, we're trying to change minds, but that's still going to take some time, right? I think that detracking and I think that unified math and I think that many of these programs, I think they're going to be very helpful, but I think it's going to take a while for us to get there. I think that we need to really continue or even accelerate, like really listening to our families who are affected by the gap, right? Because I think they have a lot of insights in terms of ways that we can help them do better, right? On top of that, and I also think that there are schools in our region and in our area who are doing a much better job at educating, I think, some of our Black and brown students. And I think that we should talk more with them and interact more with them and try to get some of their insights in terms of what can we be doing? What are we missing? And look at some of the things that they do that are very successful and use some of those strategies to continue to improve. One other thing is I'm really interested in is a little less about some of the raw statistics, let's say SAT scores, which is a 1 point in time. I'm more curious about growth. I'm more curious about how are we advancing kids of any race or any opportunity when they come in. When you come in as a freshman, how are we doing at advancing you one grade level and then the next grade level and the next grade level? And what is the spectrum of it rather than 1 point in time, right? Because at some point, it would be great if we could advance every kid 4 years. It would be even better if some kids could go 5 or even 6 years. But to do it in relation to where everybody starts at a different place and then how do we progress them is, to me, is a much more interesting and much more telling way of looking at these things than just 1 point at a time raw statistic.
Tim?
Remember in 2017, at the beginning of the work of the Imagine team, sitting in the auditorium at OPRF, watching America to Me week by week, and being so struck by that. And it was so meaningful to the Imagine process to have that as the backdrop. And equity was a huge part of the Imagine team's work and the lens through which we reviewed our facilities planning work. The district has taken some really big swings since then, since 2017. The Imagine Facilities Plan that we're now talking about, Project 2, that's been a 6-year-long process to get us to this point. Really important equity work. In 2019, we passed the racial equity policy. Something that people have been advocating for literally decades. A big swing. We're still in the early stages, I think, of implementation. We've had a series of racial equity directors. We're now on our third director. And so it's a work in progress. I'm hopeful, and we have an administration that embraces racial equity and believes in that policy. But it's early days. The Honors for All curriculum change that was implemented this year is another huge swing for the district. We have to make sure that it works. We have to make sure that in the long term, this initiative is successful. Last week, the administration presented the very first pieces of data about first semester results for the Honors for All freshman curriculum restructuring initiative. And the data is mixed, but I think that the board comments after the administration's presentation was really interesting. There are a lot of things that we can be doing right now to identify for the community the criteria that we're going to judge this initiative against, and pull out those data points and act on the ones that are actionable. If there are tweaks that we need to make to the Honors for All program, we should be making those tweaks. If there are additional supports that we need to bring into play, let's bring those into play. It is an enormous initiative for the district, and we have to make sure that it's successful.
One of my number one chores up here is scratching off lots and lots of questions that I have, because you're also thoughtful on all of these answers. I've got a lot more, so we'll try and keep it moving here. I can't help but notice that you, and for that matter, I, are all white and all male. What's up with that? Brian, start us up. And the underlying question is, as a community, how do we bring more diversity to the school board?
I'll be honest, I have no idea. All I can say is that I had an opportunity to run and I decided to pick it up, right? And, I think a lot of people don't know that actually 4 days before the applications were due for this, only one person had applied. Maybe it's the job. No, I don't know. I mean, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I don't know how to answer that. All I know is that I saw an opportunity to help the community and to help our school, and I stepped up. Why other people don't do that, I don't know.
We'll come back down this way. Jonathan.
I'll be the first to say that this does not look like a very, from a race standpoint, a very inspiring assembly in front of you right now. And I know that if I, at first blush, I would probably not be too excited about it. I made it very clear when I was considering running and talking to people about running that you know, at any point during this up until, you know, leading up to the filing process, should a candidate of color emerge, I would be more than happy to step aside and embrace that candidate if they were a really quality candidate. I think that is very important. I think that as a white man, I need to be very aware of my privilege, and and be keenly aware of how we need more representation at this level. So what I'll say, should I have the good fortune of being elected, I will be passionate about recruiting new board member candidates from the communities of color. I think it's very, very important.
Graham.
So representation does matter, and ideally our taxing bodies would have very diverse folks serving on those boards. Election cycles in Oak Park and River Forest are funny things. Sometimes you have a mass of candidates running for a small number of seats. Other times you have completely uncontested elections, or in this case, there's only 4 of us for 3 seats. In my years of being involved civically in Oak Park, I've tried to support the diversity on boards where I can. In the 2021 cycle, I was proud to work for Venus Hurd Johnson and Jeremy Duffy as they were running for District 97. In this case, this is not ideal by any means. I told you when we opened the reasons I'm running, but I also ran because I was encouraged to do so by some other community leaders, because they noticed that for whatever reason, there just weren't a lot of people turning out for D200 in this cycle.
Tim.
We clearly don't represent the community. 4 middle-aged white guys clearly are not representative, and that is a problem. When people started calling me last fall to recruit me to run, that was literally my first question. It was, do we really need another middle-aged white guy at the table? And it's still a question that I struggle with. I think that Brian is onto something. I think it does have to do with how the job is perceived and the exposure that is perceived. And I think the question for the 4 of us, or the 3 of us that are lucky enough to be elected, is what do we do to make sure this doesn't happen again? And I think that there are 2 things that are really important. One is, I think that we have to work to make the board table a safe space for all potential candidates. I think we have to make it a place where everyone can see themselves and think that they would be safe and would be able to contribute there. I think in terms of exposure to the community, I think that we have to help candidates from all backgrounds understand and believe that they're not going to be exposed and not going to be attacked by the community. I think that's really important. And I think that as candidates, as board members, you know, that would be our obligation to create that safe space. I also think that we would have an obligation to actively recruit a more diverse candidate pool for the next cycle. And I certainly would be on board for doing that.
I'm going to ask you really to try to stick to a minute. I've got a lot of questions. I want to cover as much ground as we can before we get to questions from the audience and your closing remarks. Channel 2 reported last week, brawls are, this is a quote, brawls are breaking out at Oak Park and River Forest High School with alarming regularity, including an incident a week ago in which a female security guard was hurt breaking up a fight. The district itself, Bob Skolnick, Wednesday Journal reporter, just passed this on to me. The district now says at least 38 of these kinds of incidents have taken place during this school year alone. Do you favor having a police officer back in the school full time? Graham, we'll start with you. Go down that way and come back.
So first of all, I think in the era of social media, when things like this are happening, they certainly get a lot of publicity and attention. This is an urban high school with about 3,400 students. Fights happen, and they have happened. I asked my daughter, who graduated in 2018, my son, who graduated from OPRF in 2021. We're currently mentoring my wife and I are mentoring a current OPRF sophomore, and fights occur. It's up to the administration to develop the right strategies and tactics to address that. This question of should we go back to a school resource officer present in the building, I think is separate from that topic. I don't think it's right to conflate those two things. So on the topic of an SRO, I think the first question you have to ask is, what is the purpose or objective that we would be trying to serve? Is it to respond to fights? Is it to build a better relationship between youth and law enforcement? Is it to hypothetically address more quickly an active shooter situation, which it's appalling we even have to think about those terms nowadays? Those are not questions that a board can armchair quarterback and unilaterally answer. Those questions have to be addressed by the voice of the students, the voice of the administration, and the voice of the teachers. So I don't think that question can be prejudged by a board or us as board members.
Jonathan?
I think Graham made a very valid point as a starting point to look at the advent of social media in recent years and how it does tend to sometimes make things look a lot worse than they are. I think fights have always been a part of high school environments. They certainly were in my high school growing up. And it really is about how we address those fights at the institution level and what are the systems in place. What's the best way to do that? I am a huge proponent for restorative practice. I think the more we focus on really bolstering up restorative practice efforts in the high school setting, we'll only be better off for it. There's very, very strong data that says that a systems-wide commitment to restorative practice is a very good thing. So I would say that having a police officer return to the school, to answer that question, I would say let's look at how we can better make restorative practice more sophisticated and more deeply embedded throughout the school.
Brian?
I'll be short. I do not think we should put a police officer back in the school. I think that, I mean, there's a lot of studies out there that show that in a lot of cases, this can be more harm than good. I'm not sure what the objective even would be on this. I know that the safety and security civilian teams that are in the school, I know that they've been in front of the board and said that their job has become a bit more stressful and probably needs some more support. I think that's something that we really should also look at. And, you know, like, I also agree that we should continue to pursue restorative justice. From what I hear, a lot of these fights happen in the same parts of the building. And I think that those might be places with some more safety and security that we can prevent a lot of these things from happening in the first place. But I'm not in favor of bringing police back into the schools.
Tim?
I agree with the other three candidates. I am not in favor of having a sworn police officer patrolling the halls of our high school. I am terrified by the idea of any kind of loaded weapon being present in the high school, whether that's in the hands of faculty or administration, or even a sworn Oak Park Police Department police officer. It terrifies me because I know that it increases the risk of tragedy, and that risk falls disproportionately on the shoulders of young Black men. And I don't want that risk in our high school. So I would absolutely be opposed to reintroducing sworn police officers patrolling the halls of the high school.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you for no more than 2 sentences answering this next question. I will be counting. I will cut you off. Bob Skolnick, the Wednesday Journal, reported a 37-year-old new assistant superintendent for business services is going to get $205,000 a year, despite having less than 10 years experience. Where do you stand on the high school's pay scale? 2 sentences. We'll start at that end. Brian?
it wasn't even that. It was that he also jumped from 150 to like 20 something was a big thing. I think that you have to pay what the market will bear.
Thank you. Jonathan?
I think you can establish the quality of a candidate by metrics beyond experience, the amount of years experience. And I would hope that the amount that this individual is being paid is reflective of the broad picture of what they bring to the table.
Graham? This is working very well. I like this. I'm going to do this more often. Graham?
I would be less fixated on the individual salaries of one person and want to look more broadly at average compensation for administrators and teachers relative to appropriate peer districts. And an opportunity in front of this board that I would want to bring to bear if elected is a playbook where we use benchmarking and data to assure ourselves that compensation levels at OPRF are competitive enough to attract the best talent, but also sustainable for the long term.
Thank you, Tim.
Those are very long sentences.
I'm not sure. I
Cheated.
may have
You
heard a
cheated.
semicolon in there. I'm not sure. But
I love the semicolon.
I think that traditionally at OPRF, in an incredibly demanding environment, we have placed very high expectations on our administration and on our faculty, and we have compensated them accordingly. And I think that's the right way to go.
Let me give you one sentence on this one. Hold on to that microphone, Tim. We'll go back down the other way. If you could, or if you had to cut district spending, where would you look first? One sentence. If you'd given me shorter answers earlier, we wouldn't have to be lowering the boom like this.
I'm going to pass.
Okay.
I don't know.
Graham?
This answer kind of connects to the previous answer, which is it's one thing that we've established the boundary lines for the fund balance to get it more into best practices. The next thing to look at would be to make sure that the expense level is, again, appropriate to our suitable peer districts. And again, we want to be able to attract and retain the best talent in a sustainable way. The largest expense operating wise for a school district is personnel, obviously. And
we're into 3 sentences territory now.
And we just want to make sure we're attracting the best and we can afford the best.
Jonathan?
I'm actually going to pass on that one as well.
I'll be quick. I'm less concerned about the cost levels because I think the district's actually done a really good job lately of keeping costs down. I'm much more concerned at the tax levels in relation to costs, because we've been running some pretty eye-opening surpluses, and instead of reducing the reserve, we've been actually building the reserve by overtaxing people. I think that's a bigger problem.
All right. Hang on, Mike. We'll come back this way. Again, one sentence answer, because I want to get to the audience's questions. What do you think of an idea that's been floated and sunk over the years repeatedly? The notion of combining Oak Park and maybe River Forest High School and elementary districts into one governmental agency. One sentence.
This is the first time I've ever heard of that.
And what do you think of it?
I think that one of the things that I think is an issue is that I think sometimes there's too much of a disconnect between the middle schools and the elementary schools and when the time kids go to high school. I think there's some real merit to that, but I also know that in Oak Park, we like our fiefdoms, and the last thing we want to do is combine things for efficiencies.
Jonathan, just keep coming down this way.
If it meant all day kindergarten for River Forest, absolutely.
Graham?
This isn't well suited for a short answer, so I'll do it really fast. The quirk of Illinois is that it has an inordinate number of taxing bodies and governmental units. The state of Illinois has about 850 school districts, and there's a bunch of legal complexity in an attempt to try to combine school districts. I think it'd be more work than would be worth it, but I do think there's a lot more opportunities for collaboration among the 3 districts.
Go ahead, Tim. I guess that was like 3 or 4 sentences. So if you make them short, you can have 3 or 4.
I agree with Graham. The key is collaboration between the districts. I started my career as an administrator for the Chicago Public Schools, and I learned firsthand what happens when a district becomes larger and larger and is unwieldy. I think the ideal district is the smallest possible district with the smallest number of schools. You can really have an impact as an administration, and you really impact the direction of individual local schools, the fewer schools there are.
My last question before we get to your questions. I have a friend, fellow journalist and Oak Park resident I've known for a quarter century, parent of District 200 graduates, who told me about recently dipping a toe in the process of becoming a substitute teacher at the high school, but who said the paperwork was such a pain, the potential pay so low that this friend gave up. Can the schools do more, and if so, what, to better leverage community resources, paid and volunteer, like my smart and talented friends? Any ideas on that? Okay, let's start with you, Tim, and go down that way.
Yeah, this is a nationwide problem. There's a substitute teacher shortage. There is a teacher shortage, and we have teachers who are, increasingly dissatisfied with the profession and leaving the profession. Recruitment at all levels is going to be increasingly really difficult. And so, yes, we need to do everything we possibly can to recruit subs. I think we also need to be focused on retention, both of full-time faculty and of full-time subs.
Graham.
This is a question of state law that has to change at the state level, but I would say that Oak Park politically punches above its weight because its taxing bodies have been effective advocating in Springfield. We also happen to have a very influential member of the legislature in Don Harmon from our village, and I think we should leverage to address that problem.
Jonathan?
I think that making sure that your friend is paid an honest and fair wage for that type of work is certainly very, very important. And it's something that we should make sure that nobody that has the opportunity to do that type of substitute teaching feels like they are not valued. I think we do have work to do in broadening our connections to several community resources, several community elements, and I think we've done a good job some places, but I do think there's a lot of work to do there as well.
Brian?
Again, I guess I would just say that if you're having a hard time hiring people, pay more, pay what the market will bear. I don't know that we can do much about the paperwork aspect of it. If we really need them, we need to pay what people want. Partnership with the community, I think, is really awesome. I heard that there weren't any teachers within the school that wanted to take over the debate team, so they decided to use funds to hire a community member who was into the debate team to start doing that. I think that's an awesome idea. And I also think that there might be more opportunities for people who maybe have more flexible schedules and can do things like that, head and do interesting after school programs like the business incubator or whatever. I think that's really cool.
We have questions from the audience. Jessica McKinnon, thank you very much for gathering these. And then the candidates will get closing remarks after we do these. Okay. I'm going to have to count sentences on this because we've got a hard stop here. We'll start at this end. Tim, and again, I'm going to ask really for short and sweet answers on these because I'd like to get them all in. How do you envision working with the teachers union?
It's a great question. I was director of labor relations for the Chicago Public Schools. I was the point person in day-to-day the relationship with the Chicago Teachers Union. And I learned a lot in that role about teachers and about how to collaborate and work with teachers. I would envision certainly both in working day to day over the next 4 years, but also in the next round of collective bargaining with the teachers. The key to success is constant communication and a feeling like you are collaborating, that you're solving problems together.
Graham?
So I very much respect and admire teachers. My mother was a teacher as a single parent raising me. And I first got active in public education advocacy here in Oak Park in a situation where I felt like a teacher was not being dealt fairly with by an administration. And that's what first got me involved. And I think also, having been a member of District 97 School Board, I've been through the collective bargaining process. I've been through those negotiations. And Tim's right. You have to look at this as a collaboration. The teachers are on the front lines. That's where the rubber meets the road. They're a white collar workforce that just happens to be members of a union. And I would rely on my past experience to successfully work with them to reach an agreement that works for the students.
Jonathan.
I would agree with Tim that having very clear communication, powerful communication standards is paramount in working with the teachers, and making sure that there is a commitment to a process that is informed by transparency and accountability, and really listening to one another. It should never be a process that descends into rancor and acrimony. It should always be a part of our community process, and as such, one that is honored and respected.
Brian.
Yeah, we're asking our teachers to do a lot more. You know, we have a lot of the racial equity things that are going on that they're having to do training on. And also now we're having different curriculum with the detracking, and then we have a whole new math curriculum. Again, I think it's all about collaboration. It's having to work in partnership and say, this is the goal that we need to get to. How can we help each other get there?
I'm going to read this word for word. And so this is from the audience, and I'm going to ask you to honor this audience member's request. Yes or no answer, it says here. Was America founded in 1619? Brian, we'll start with you down at that and come down this way.
No.
Jonathan.
No.
Graham.
Nope.
Tim.
No.
All right. I'm sure follow-up questions will haunt you on the campaign trail. The OPRF board sets strategic priorities and currently has a list numbered 1 to 4. If you could come up with your own 4 strategic priorities from scratch, what would they be in order of importance and why? 4 strategic priorities. I'm going to ask you just to give us that list of 4. Jonathan, I think it's your turn to start first. I've lost track.
4 strategic priorities. We need to do a better job providing skills-based vocational opportunities for our students. It's the first one. We need to make sure that our students have that we have built the capacity at the school level to serve students and their need for mental health. Make sure that our newfound capacity or focus on mental health issues is not a flavor of the month, pandemic related sort of thing. We need to really think that through and establish the right structure and process to deal with that. I also think that we need to, with great fidelity, follow through with the Project 2 decision when that is made. Make sure that that is implemented smoothly, and then make the necessary pivot to the next stage. And then lastly, I would say just really look at a commitment to culture throughout every single level of the school, and how we can use restorative practice as a guide to help build better culture in the school.
Come back down this way, Graham.
Number 1 remains the addressing the opportunity gap and ensuring there's equity in a school that creates an environment that is safe and inclusive and welcoming for all children in order to be able to achieve their full potential. Secondly, would be establishing sound fiscal governance and strong financial stewardship that enables a ready foundation in order to address those equity issues. The third would be enable a long-term capital infrastructure facilities plan that includes not just a vision of what needs to be improved, but also a strategy for funding that plan. And the fourth thing I would say would be to improve collaboration amongst the taxing bodies in Oak Park and River Forest.
Tim?
My 4 would be empathy, equity, facilities, faculty. Empathy meaning I think that we are in the midst of a mental health crisis with the kids at our high school. I think that our kids have suffered trauma during the pandemic, and that trauma is manifesting in really meaningful ways. We have kids who are have heightened anxiety and depression, who are checked out, who are acting out, who are using drugs and alcohol, who started using during the pandemic. And I think that we have to recognize the trauma as just that, as trauma that can't easily be put aside. It has to be processed and dealt with. And I know that the administration is doing good work on this, and I admire the administrators and the teachers who are who have put together programs on this. It's not enough. We need to be doing more to address our kids' mental health. I really do believe it's a crisis. That would be my top priority. Second, equity. We have to continue on the big swing that we're making on the freshman curriculum restructuring. We have to make sure that that initiative succeeds and do whatever we need to do to ensure that. On facilities, we've talked about Project 2. I am a big supporter. We need to go forward with that. And faculty relates to my first one. I think that our faculty suffered trauma during the pandemic as well. And I worry about the pressure that we're putting our faculty under with curriculum restructuring. I worry that they have not been given the space and the resources they need to properly recover from the pandemic. They are struggling. And I think that we need to be doing more to provide supports for our faculty.
Ryan.
Two, there we go. Number one is, I think that mine are probably more high level than some of these. Number one is that students are central to everything that's done in the building. Number two is equity and closing the gap. Number three, I believe that the school needs to have a strong and especially stronger relationship with the community, because that community support is very important for the success of the school. And then number four, I do really believe that we need to have a collaborative relationship with teachers, because they're the ones who make it all go. Let's get everybody on board and pulling in the same direction.
Hang on to that microphone. Since you had the most time to think about that one, I'm going to start with you this one. Someone came with 2 pages of questions, so thank you, thoughtful audience member. Would you be willing to challenge the administration when the administration comes to the board for your approval if ideas and arguments are not fact-based and or not actually applicable to Oak Park and River Forest High School? That sounds like a yes or no question. Would you be willing to challenge the administration when they come to the board for your approval of ideas and arguments that aren't fact-based and or aren't applicable to OPRF? Would you be willing to tell the administration to take a flying leap? Is the way I think that. Yes?
Yes, that's the job of a board member.
Jonathan?
Yes, absolutely.
Graham?
Yes.
Tim?
Yes, that is the job of a board member. I would just say, though, that it's not always the job of a board member to do that publicly. That kind of pushback, that kind of disagreement often happens behind closed doors in private session. It's not the job of a board member to embarrass the administration or to call them out publicly. So absolutely, I would disagree with them and push back, but you might not see that.
All right, we've come to that point in the evening, gentlemen, when this is your chance to issue some closing remarks, to take a moment, ideally about a minute, to say whatever you'd like, the words that you hope will ring in the ears of our audience members, both here and on Zoom, as they bid us farewell. Tim, we'll start with you.
Charlie, thank you so much for moderating tonight. I've been such a fan of yours for years. I'm a longtime supporter and subscriber to Chicago Public Square. And if anyone in the audience hasn't discovered Chicago Public Square, you really should. It's like this little moment of joy in my inbox every weekday morning.
No money has changed hands here. No money. Thank you.
No, it's great. And you provide a service to the community every day, and I appreciate it. To Dan Haley and Growing Community Media and Wednesday Journal, thank you again for sponsoring this event. This is a true public service, as is the great newspaper. Thanks to everyone for coming out on a cold winter night. I really appreciate it. And everybody watching on Zoom. I really appreciate your interest in D200 and the future of our most important institution, our high school. I hope that you vote on the first Tuesday of April. I hope that you early vote starting March 20th. If you're planning on going out of town for spring break, make plans to vote before or after. And that's all I have to say.
Graham.
I want to thank everybody for the opportunity to be with you this evening and for sharing your time either in person or on Zoom. My name is Graham Brisbane, and I'm asking for your vote either on March 20th, starting then when early voting begins, or on election day of April 4th. And for your consideration, what I would share with you is we've talked this evening a lot of the nuts and bolts issues, but I want to offer my approach to board service, which is something that I learned in my experience while serving on the District 97 board from 2013 to 2017. And the approach is really pinned to three things. Number one, board service requires you to make student-centered decisions. You always have to ask yourself for every issue that comes across the table, what's in the best interest of students? And sometimes you can lose that because of the cacophony of voices and competing interests that might come your way. So I pledge to always address each issue with that question of what's in the best interest of students. The second approach is listen carefully and listen with humility. School board issues are complicated, whether it's policy or school finance or what have you. No one person has all or group has all the answers. You have to listen with humility and make a point to find those voices that are traditionally not often heard. You usually have well-resourced families who can show up to board meetings and show up to all kinds of events. You have to make an effort to find those students and families who can't be as present. The third thing I would offer you is collaboration. A school board member is just one of 7 people, and you can't really get anything done unless you're prepared to collaborate and follow and find the common ground. So in my service, I pledge to follow those 3 tenets or principles, and I think in doing so, I can be a very effective board member for you as community members, but most importantly for our 3,400 kids and their families.
Jonathan.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Dan and Jessica and Bob and Jill for your work in putting this on tonight. This has been lovely. I would also echo Graham's statement about really making sure that we are taking a good hard look at how the decision making is informed and what are the feedback mechanisms in place where we are learning from the students, where we're learning from the parents, where we're learning from the teachers and the staff in the school. We need to have reliable instruments and systems where we can trust that we're getting the feedback that we need from all parties, all agents involved, all actors involved in the school setting so that we do make the right decisions going forward. I do think that there is a great opportunity to approach a board that is functioning very well together and carry on that momentum with collegiality and a commitment to collaboration. And I do think that it would be a great honor to be a part of that. There's been a lot of great work done after the very rancorous referendum of 2015 in building up trust in the community and building more transparency and accountability. And I would be very honored and excited to continue to take that forward. Thank you.
Ryan.
Again, thanks for coming out. Thanks for watching on Zoom on a Thursday night. And again, thanks to the GCM group for hosting tonight. It's no small feat. One of the reasons that I've been running is because I feel as if there's often a disconnect between the school and the community. And I think it comes down to finances, facilities, even communications in the relationship. And this is something that I've spent a lot of my life doing, which is trying to build better relationships. And I think that in order to do the big projects that we have ahead of us, whether it's closing the gap, whether it's, helping our kids who've gone through a tough time, I do think that we need to do a lot of listening. We need to do a lot of digesting and then trying to find strategic ways forward. And that's what I've done. And that's what I'm committing to do, to be on the board. And I hope that you'll vote for me, both in early voting and no, that would be the Chicago way, to vote for me and trust me with service on the board. Thanks.
Pretty clear we could talk all night, but we are just about out of time. Ladies and gentlemen, here and at home or wherever you're watching on Zoom, you have until April 4th to make up your mind, and I hope you'll use that time wisely. I want to thank Dominican University, wonderful host as always. I want to thank our candidates, Tim Brandhurst, Graham Brisbane, Jonathan Livingston, Brian Souders. And I want to thank the Wednesday Journal team, including Bob Skolnick, Jessica McKinnon, and Dan Haley, for doing the hard work of covering the community day in and day out. Gentlemen, I can say with confidence that had we all been in high school at the same time, I would have been honored to consider you my classmates. Thank you for volunteering to take on this difficult role. I'm Charlie Meyerson. So long for now.